These things always frighten me. Is it on? Okay, good evening, ladies and gentlemen, and welcome to our reading and discussion this evening. I must say that we are indebted to the Committee on Lectures for the funding of this performance. And Mr. Murphy is going to read from his work. He will discuss it to a certain extent, but he says, please, no questions. Questions are for politicians. And I think maybe I agree. I could read you 4 pages of information, but I'm sure you'd rather hear Mr. Murphy, so I'll cut this down to a minimum. I will reveal the terrible secret of his age. He was born on the 6th of August in 1927. You can't hear me, James? Can we? That's not a. Oh, okay. Born in August 1927 in County Galway, Ireland, son of Sir William Murphy, who was at one time the mayor of Colombo, Ceylon, and the governor of the Bahamas. So his childhood was spent in Ireland and Ceylon. Sri Lanka, they call it now. He was educated at Canterbury Cathedral and King's School, Canterbury, attended Wellington College, and then went to Magdalen College, Oxford, where he studied English language and literature under C.S. Lewis and J.A.W. Bennett, and received his bachelor's in 1948 and followed that up by the master's. Then he did all kinds of interesting things, like being aide-de-camp to his father in the Bahamas, working for the insurance company Lloyd's of London, reviewing poetry for The Spectator and the Times Literary Supplement. He received the A.E. Memorial Award. A.E. is George W. Russell, for those who don't recognize that pseudonym, for poetry. And he has spent his time in Ireland, including working as a night watchman on a salmon river, which means scaring away the poachers, I suspect. He lived in Crete, directed English school in Canea, attended the Sorbonne, farmed sheep in the Wicklow Mountains in Ireland, built his own home out of granite, makes his pied-à-terre in Ireland, but he goes to other parts of the country like Iowa City to teach the right way to write poetry, according to the Irish doctrine. He has published a number of books, first in limited editions, later on a series of books. Let's see. Well, I said I'm not going to review this whole business. He has at least 5 published books. He won a prize, the Arts Council of Great Britain Award, for his long poem, The Battle of Aughrim, which was published in 1968 by Faber and Faber, and I believe he's going to read some of that to us this evening. It's been broadcast on BBC in the 3rd program. It's been broadcast on Irish television. It's issued as an LP by Cladach Records of Dublin, and has even appeared in Belgium, and has been presented as a théâtre poème in Brussels. He has taught various places. Has just finished his stint teaching at the Writers' Workshop in Iowa City, and I'm not going to bother you with any more of this information. You read a lot of it in the paper anyway. So I will then present to you Mr. Richard Murphy.
Before I begin, I might say that if there's any problem in hearing, would you move up from the back and come and sit in the front? I don't mind if you want to walk out after about 10 or 15 minutes, but there are a lot of empty seats here, and it would save me having to raise my voice very loud. I can make myself heard at the back, but it would be more fun if you were a little bit nearer the When I was watching that salmon river at night a long time ago in the early 50s, if it rained heavily, and of course you know it always does rain very heavily in the west of Ireland, the salmon were safe because there's too much current in the river for the poachers' nets. So I had nothing to do. That's the kind of job I've always tried to get. They exist in America as well as in Ireland. And on one occasion, my brother was on holiday in the west of Ireland, and he invited me to come with him on a trip to an island on the ocean. He had hired a sailing vessel of a traditional type known as a pukorn, and he asked me to come with him. And he was going to go to Clare Island. Clare Island was a long way off. I'd never been there, and it was full of legends, and I was hoping to get there. And I was working at the time on a poem called Voyage to an Island, and that was a very deeply mythological poem. I was very heavily influenced at the time by Dylan Thomas. And of course, here was a chance to test mythology against a real voyage to an actual island. Well, we never got to Clare Island at all. We got to another island called Inishbofin. And afterwards I wrote this poem, and my mythological poem had been called Voyage to an Island. This poem is called Sailing to an Island. The boom above my knees lifts, and the boat drops, and the surge departs. My cheek kissed and rejected, kissed, as the gaff sways a tangent, cuts the infinite sky to red maps, and the mast draws 8 and 8 across measureless blue. The boatmen sing or sleep. We point all day for our chosen island, Clare, with its crags purpled by legend. There, under castles, the hot O'Malleys, daughters of Granuaile, the pirate queen who boarded a Turk with a blunderbuss, comb red hair and assemble cattle. Across the shelved Atlantic groundsel, plumbed by the sun's kingfisher rod, we sail to locate in sea, earth, and stone the myth of a shrewd and brutal swordswoman who piously endowed an abbey. 7 hours we try, against wind and tide, tack and return, making no headway. The north wind sticks like a gag in our teeth. Encased in a mirage, steam on the water, loosely we coast where hideous rocks jag, an acropolis of cormorants, an extinct volcano where spiders spin, a purgatory guarded by hags and bristled with breakers. The breeze as we plunge slowly stiffens. There are hills of sea between us and land, between our hopes and the island harbour. A child vomits. The boat veers and bucks. There is no refuge on the gannet's cliff. We are far, far out. The hull is rotten. The spars are splitting. The rigging is frayed. And our helmsman laughs uncautiously. What of those who must earn their living on the ribald face of a mad mistress? We, in holiday fashion, know this is the boat that belched its crew dead on the shingle in the Cleggan disaster. Now she dips, and the sail hits the water. She luffs to a squall, is struck, and shudders. Someone is shouting. The boom, weak as scissors, has snapped. The boatman is praying. Orders thunder and canvas cannonades. She smothers in spray. We still have a mast. The oar makes a boom. I am told to cut cords out of fishing lines, fasten the jib, rope slash my cheeks. Ease, ease at last. She swings to leeward. We can safely run. Washed over rails our Clare Island dreams. With storm behind us, we straddle the wakeful waters that draw us headfast to Inishbofin. The bows rock as she overtakes the surge. We neither sleep, nor sing, nor talk, but look to the land where the men are mowing. What will the islanders think of our folly? The whispering, spontaneous reception committee nods and smokes by the calm jetty. Am I jealous of these courteous fishermen who hand us ashore, for knowing the sea intimately, for respecting the storm that took 9 of their men on one bad night, and 5 from Rossadilisk in this very boat? Their harbour is sheltered. They are slow to tell the story again. There is local pride in their home-built ships. We are advised to return next day by the mail. But tonight we stay, drinking with people happy in the monotony of boats, bringing the catch to the Cleggan market, cultivating fields, or retiring from America with enough to soak till morning or old age. The bench below my knees lifts, and the floor drops, and the words depart, depart, with faces blurred by the smoke. An old man grips my arm. His shot eyes twitch, quietly dissatisfied. He has lost his watch, an American gold from Boston Gas Works. He treats the company to the secretive surge, the sea of his sadness. I slip outside, fall among stones and nettles, crackling dry twigs on an elder tree, while an accordion drones above the hill. Later, I reach a room where the moon stares cobwebbed through the window. The tide has ebbed. Boats are careened in the harbour. Here is a bed. I was myself living on a boat of the kind known as a Galway hooker in 9 years after that poem was written, on the island of Inishbofin, when I received a visit from the great American poet Theodore Roethke. And he came to the island and lived there for about a month, fell in love with the place and with the people and with the birds and with the bar. And he became a good friend of mine. And when, under very sad circumstances, he had to leave because he was suffering, as his wife said, from manic depression, as my father put it, from drinking too much whiskey. He had to go to our county mental hospital for treatment. I later wrote this poem as a tribute to Theodore Roethke, and it's called The Poet on the Island. And in it I refer to the greenhouses, and he was brought up in Saginaw in Michigan, where his father was a florist, and they had a lot of greenhouses, and the greenhouses feature in some of Roethke's best poems. And also I allude to his Prussian ancestry. There is, by the way, I'm on my way at this moment I'm on my way home to the west of Ireland to attend the first Festival of the Arts on the island of Inishbofin, at which Roethke's widow is going to unveil a plaque to his memory, and it is very appropriately and significantly located in the bar on the island. And that festival will be from April the 22nd to the 29th on the island of Inishbofin off the west coast of Ireland, right out in the Atlantic Ocean. on a wet night, laden with books for luggage, and stumbling under the burden of himself, he reached the pier, looking for a refuge. Darkly he crossed to the island 6 miles off. The engine pulsed, the sails invented rhythm, while the sea expanded and the rain drummed softly. Safety on water, he rocked with a new theme, and in the warmth of his mind's greenhouse bloomed a poem nurtured like a chrysanthemum. His forehead, a Prussian helmet, moody, domed, relaxed in the sun. A lyric was his lance. To be loved by the people, he, a stranger, hummed in the herring store on Sunday, crammed with drunks, ballads of Baudry with a speakeasy stress. Yet lonely they left him, one of the Yanks. The children understood. This was not madness. How many orphans had he fathered in words, robust and cunning, but never heartless? He watched the harbor scouted by seabirds. His fate was like fish under poetry's beaks. Words began weirdly to take off inwards. Time that they calendar in seasons, not in clocks, in gardens dug over and houses roofed, was to him a seesaw of joys and shocks, where his body withered, but his style improved. A storm shot up, his glass cracked in a gale, an abstract thunder of darkness deafened the listeners he'd once given roses, now hail. He'd burst the lyric barrier, logic ended, doctors were called, and he agreed to sail. I was born in a very old house, about 50 miles inland from the island of Inishbofin, a house that had been built in the 17th century, a big house surrounded by a large domain, and one of those houses that had been associated with the Anglo-Irish Protestant ascendancy, ruled Ireland for hundreds of years. And about whom, of course, against whom all the ardor of the Fenians was raised. This was the house into which I was born, and this poem, The Woman of the House, is about my grandmother. And if you like to look on it as such, you can think of it as a portrait of a good person in a possibly not so good situation. It's in memory of my grandmother, Lucy Mary Ormsby, whose home was in the west of Ireland and who lived from 1873 to 1958. And the poem was written shortly after her death. On a patrician evening in Ireland, I was born in the guest room. She delivered me. May I deliver her from the cold hand where now she lies, with a brief elegy. It was her house where we spent holidays, with candles to bed and ghostly stories. In the lake of her heart we were islands where the wild asses galloped in the wind. Her mind was a vague and log-warmed yarn, spun between sleep and acts of kindliness. She fed our feelings as dew feeds the grass on April nights, and our mornings were green. And those happy days when, in spite of rain, we'd motor west where the salmon boats tossed, she would sketch on the pier among the pots waves in a sunset or the rising moon. Indian meal porridge and brown soda bread, boiled eggs and buttermilk, honey from gorse. Far more than we wanted she always offered in a heart surfeit. She ate little herself, mistress of mossy acres and unpaid rent. She crossed the walls on foot to feed the sick. though frugal cousins frowned on all she spent. People had faith in her healing talent. She bandaged the wounds that poverty caused, in the house that famine laborers built, gave her hands to cure impossible wrong in a useless way, and was loved for it. Hers were the fruits of a family tree, a china clock, the church's calendar, gardeners polite, governesses plenty, and incomes waiting to be married for. How the feckless fun would flicker her face, reading our future by cards at the fire. Rings and elopements, love letters, old lace, a signet of jokes to seal our desire. It was sad about Maud, poor Maud. She'd sigh to think of the friend she lured and teased till she married the butler, starved to death, no service either by padre or priest. Cholera raged in the residency. They kept my uncle alive on port, which saved him to slaughter a few sepoys and retire to Galway in search of sport. The pistol that lost an ancestor's duel, the hoof of the horse that carried him home to be stretched on chairs in the drawing room, hung by the Rangoon Prince and the Crimean Medal. Lever and lover, Somerville and Ross have fed the same worm as Blackstone and Gibbon. The mildew has spotted Clarissa's spine and soiled the dispatches of Wellington. Beside her bed lay an old Bible that her Colonel Rector husband used to read, and a new Writers and Artists yearbook to bring a never-printed girlhood back. The undeveloped thoughts died in her head, but from her heart, through the people she loved, images spread and intuitions lived, more than the mere sense of what she said. At last, her warmth made ashes of the trees ancestors planted, and she was removed to hospital to die there, certified. Her house, but not her kindness, has found heirs. Compulsory comforts penned her limping soul. With all she uttered, they smiled and agreed. When she summoned the chauffeur, no one appeared, but a chrome hearse was ready for nightfall. Order the car for 9 o'clock tonight. I must get back. They're expecting me. I'll bring the spiced beef and the nuts and fruit. Come home and I'll brew you lime flower tea. The house in flames. Nothing is insured. Send for the doctor. Let the horses go. The dogs are barking again. Has the cow calved in the night? What is that great singed bird? I don't know who you are, but you've kind eyes. My children are abroad, and I'm alone. They left me in this jail. You all tell lies. You're not my people. My people have gone. Now she's spent everything. The golden waste is washed away. Silent her heart's hammer. The children overseas no longer need her. They are like aftergrass to her harvest. People she loved were those who worked the land, whom the land satisfied more than wisdom. They've gone. A tractor plows where horses strained. Sometimes sheep occupy their roofless room. Through our inheritance all things have come, the form, the means, all by our family. The good of being alive was given through them. We ourselves limit that legacy. The bards in their beds once beat out ballads under leaky thatch, listening to seabirds. But she, in the long ascendancy of rain, served biscuits on a tray with ginger wine. Time can never relax like this again. She in her phaeton looking for folklore, he writing sermons in the library till lunch, then fishing all the afternoon. On a wet winter evening in Ireland, I let go her hand, and we buried her in the family earth beside her husband. Only to think of her now warms my mind. Six weeks after I was born in that house of my grandmother's in the west of Ireland, I was taken out to Ceylon. And I'm afraid I'm not going to call it Sri Lanka, because in those days no one had ever heard of Sri Lanka. We knew it as Ceylon, and it was to Ceylon that I went as a child. And it's Ceylon that I remember in the poems that I'm going to read to you next. And this island exists now only as a matter of, only in the imagination of poets, or in the records of historians, in the memories of people my age or a little bit older. It was a time when the British Empire covered 1/3 of the land surface of the world, and when that area of the world was ruled by very, very little physical force. There was, in fact, very little real power backing up the authority that was exerted by the civil servants in very faraway places like Ceylon, where my father was in that civil service. And the civil servants in those days were picked because they had won first-class honours in classics at either Oxford, Cambridge, Edinburgh or Dublin University, and this was considered exactly the right sort of training for governing a province in India or in Burma. And I think it probably was. Anyhow, this poem, the first poem I'm going to read you, is literally a flashback. It's called Firebug. And you have to think that of the child in this poem, who's a 6-year-old boy of speaking English, who lived in a little empire of his own, which was ruled by Nanny. And the rise and fall of the British Nanny has been recorded in a very interesting book published a few years ago, and very well reviewed by Auden in the New York Review of Books, in which he ended a quite famous review saying that he thanked God that he had a nanny as well as a mammy. It did funny things, different things to different people, being reared by Nanny. Byron's nanny was only 18 years old and was very beautiful, and she seduced him when he was about 9. My nanny wasn't that kind at all. But if you detect any little note of evil in this poem, you can put it down to colonialism. But that is having hindsight, I'm afraid. He's tired of winding up the gramophone halfway through 3 Little Maids, and waiting for a rickshaw to return from the bazaar. The monsoon teems on the compound. A coolie, splitting coconuts on an iron spike, stoops to wring the rain out of his loincloth. The boy picks up a box of matches. His little sister comes from the nursery holding a doll. Give me that. What for? I want to set it on fire. You wouldn't dare. I will if you help me. She puts the doll on the floor. He strikes a match and holds it gingerly under the pink legs. The girl screeches like a cockatoo. The fire bursts into song, eats the doll, sticks out its tongue, gyrating like a crimson top, then dies. Burnt celluloid leaves a guilty smell. The girl cries over the ashes, "Give me back my doll." An angel took it to heaven, didn't you see? The devil needs thrashing with a shoe. One of the most absolute certainties in the mind of that little 6-year-old in Ceylon in 1933 was that it was very good of God and very lucky for him, the boy, that God had arranged that he should have been born to speak English. Because if he had been born to speak any other language, he would then have had to have learnt English as a foreigner. And this would have put him into some kind of foreign relationship with God. And this was a devastating thought. And anyhow, this accounts for a certain feeling of supreme confidence, I suppose, in people who are born speaking English. And yet, there was for this child set in this country a very, very small minority, the governing class, surrounded by masses and masses of natives who died of all sorts of terrifying diseases all the time, which he himself, by which he himself was endangered, scorpions in the shoes and malaria and mosquitoes, terrible plagues. That very, very frightening. I mean, the world has changed. But well done. This I'm sure all of you have had at some time in your childhood, if you flash back to it, the experience of repeating a word over and over and over again until suddenly all meaning is suddenly drained out of the sound. And it's a very frightening thing, this. Well, this happened to me in Ceylon, and this poem, the poem is about this, and it's about a bird called a coppersmith, which makes a noise in the tree. A temple tree grew in our garden in Ceylon. We knew it by no other name. The flower, if you turned it upside down, looked like a Dagobah with an onion dome. A holy perfume, stronger than the evil tang of betel nut, enticed me into its shade on the stuffiest afternoon, where I stood and listened to the tiny hammer stroke of the crimson coppersmith perched above my head. His tuk, 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 and his donk, donk, donk was spoken in a language I never understood, and there I began to repeat out loud to myself an English word such as beat, 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 till hammering too hard I lost the meaning in the sound, which faded and left nothing behind, a blank mind. The compound spinning round, my brain melting, as if I'd stood in the sun too long without a topi and was going blind, till I and the bird, the word and the tree were one. I'll read you one more poem about Ceylon before we return to Ireland. And this is called The Fall, and it happened, we move now to upcountry, to Kandy, which was the old ancient capital of the Sinhalese kingdom of Ceylon, where there's a famous Temple of the Tooth. And the poem is about scientific experiment and power and the fear of death. It's called The Fall, and of course that implies it's about sin. Thunder in the Patnas! He's falling off a cliff. Every branch he catches breaks. Down he hurtles, counting 1, 2, then wakes in the nick of time. His heart pounds with relief. It's Nanny's afternoon off. He untucks his mosquito net and shakes the fear of scorpions from his shoes. Hours to go, nothing to do but wait. A bell tolls at the Temple of the Tooth. He peeps at the bathroom coolie rinsing a pot, picks up his cat, and saunters out to the upstairs nursery veranda. Would Marmalade die if he fell from this height? A bullock bandy creaks past the compound gate. Why don't you try it? His brother says. Cats have 4 feet to land on. They're not like us. He hugs the warm, purring bag of muscle, fur, and bone. Suppose it kills him. I dare you to do it. The boy holds his pet over the green balustrade and lets go. The legs fly out like an X. Marmalade pancakes and lies dead still on the lawn. A wanderoo gibbers in the crown of a royal palm. Look, he's alive. I saw him twitch. They rush downstairs in time to see the cat vanish near a snake hole under a jasmine hedge. That night he walks to the chair with long wooden arms. Whiskey glass, tobacco pouch, crossword puzzle, pen. To own up like a gentleman. Scent of cartridges ejected from a shotgun. Glint of pince-nez. Mosaic frown. The hand with a gold signet ring bends him down. A lion rampant on a little hairy finger. Out in the jungle, beyond the firefly net, pooches are biting Marmalade, sucking his blood. Tuck up tight. I'm not going to kiss you tonight, naughty boy. Do all experiments go fat? Early in the morning, kitchen coolies shout. Marmalade walks in purring, 4 unbroken feet. Well, you don't have to go all the way to Ceylon to find cruelty or hunger or illiteracy. You can find it right at home in Ireland nowadays. You don't even have to go back to 1933. And the next group of poems, we're back in Ireland, the next group of poems is about the lives of people who live or have lived until very recently on the side of the roads, the travelling people of Ireland, or the tinkers, or the itinerants. They are the gypsies of Ireland, but I have to explain that they're not Romany gypsies. The Romanies, when they got as far as Ireland, one family came to Ireland and sent back word that there were far too many beggars on the road ahead of them. It wasn't worth their while coming in to the place. And so very few Romanies have infiltrated to Ireland. They just missed it out and came directly to America. And there has been a strong move by different people and by government and so on to educate the children of the traveling people. They tend to be, their economy is one of begging. The children are taught to beg when they're very young, so they don't have time to go to school. They can't go to school because they don't have any breakfast unless they go out to beg for it. And they get fed in the farmhouses. So they grow up illiterate. The tradition of the travellers in Ireland was nomadic. They had not been through the agrarian revolution that all settled people have been through in the past. They were living way, way back in the nomadic age. And this poem, is called The Reading Lesson, is an attempt to teach a 14-year-old boy of this background who was born in a wattle tent in a ditch on the side of the road in Ireland, and who was taught by his mother to beg and steal when he was very young, and to teach him at the age of 14 how to read and write. And combined in my mind with that that theme was the thought that in the Greek mythology, that the protector of all travellers, the god of travel, was of course Hermes, who was also the god of commerce, and he was also the god of thieves. And you can see the connection, perfectly sort of logical process. And he stole Apollo's cattle, and Apollo was the god of poetry. There was a certain friction between the poet and the itinerant. 14 years old, learning the alphabet, he finds letters harder to catch than hares without a greyhound. Can't I give him a dog to track them down? Or put them in a cage? He's caught in a trap until I let him go, pinioned by, "Don't you want to learn to read?" I'll be the same man whatever I do. He looks at a page as a mule balks at a gap from which a goat may hobble out and bleat. His eyes jink from a sentence like flush snipe escaping shot. A sharp word, and he'll mooch back to his piebald mare and bantam cock. Our purpose is as tricky to retrieve as mercury from a smashed thermometer. And he says, "I'll not read any more." Should I give up? His hands, long-fingered as the Celtic scribes, will grow callous, gathering sticks or scrap, exploring pockets, the horny drunk loiterers at the fairs, giving them lice. A neighbour chuckles. You can never tame the wild duck. When his wings grow, he'll fly off. If books resembled roads, he'd quickly read, but they're small farms to him, fenced by the page, ploughed into lines with letters drilled like oats. A field of tasks, he'll always be outside. If words were banknotes, he would filch a wad. If they were pheasants, they'd be in his pot for breakfast. Or if wrens, he'd make them king. When the children of travellers go to school, as they do now, when their parents are settled in houses by the county council, they come up against other problems in the learning process, other forms of cruelty, which may seem harsher to them than the natural cruelty of living a wild life on the side of the road. The next poem is called Shelter, and it's about a little girl who goes to a village school in the west of Ireland. And this is, just technical note, this is a sonnet in 2 sentences without any rhyme. Girl with a sheaf of rye straw in your arms, how much you carry from a loaded trailer parked at the door in a stray sunny shaft at the tail end of summer, deep into the barn to store for thatch if ever we get the weather or the time before winter sets in, how much you help me, child, in the hour after school, hour of your release, face wet with tears that well up out of a cruelty done to you, bruise marks around your lips, a speechless harm. How much you help me to make the dark inside glitter with sheaves bound firm to keep out storm. Hear how they rustle as we lay them down. Their broken heads are thrashed clean of grain. And the last in that sequence, so this is not to be thought of really as a sequence, it's just they're poems on in the same area, is a more recent poem called Care, which you may have seen in the New York Review of Books recently. The poem I was pleased to see in that journal, which comes from printed in the West, published in the West Side of New York. You can't imagine anything further away, more remote in terms of sophistication and intelligence, and that from an Irish goat. This poem is about an Irish goat, and it's in kind of terza rima. It's called Care, and in Ireland, care as a word has been very much associated with the attempt to do something for underprivileged children in recent years, to put them into institutions and to wash them and clothe them and so on. And this poem is on that very theme of what happens when you try to take a creature from the wild and do everything in the world for it. Kidded in April above Glencolumkill on a treeless hill backing north, she throve sucking milk off heather and rock until I came with children to buy her. We drove south, passing Drumcliff. Restless in the car, bleating, she gulped at plastic tits we'd shove copiously in her mouth. Soon she'd devour whatever we'd give. Prettily she poked her gypsy head with hornbuds through barbed wire to nip off pea-tops, her fawn pelt streaked with black forest shadow and alpine snow. I stalled her wildness in a pen that locked. She grew tame and fat, fed on herbs I knew her body needed. We ransacked Calmore to bring her oak leaf, ivy and bark to chew. I gutted goat books, learning how to cure fluke, pulpy kidney, black garget, looping ill. All my attention bled to cope with her. No fenceless commonage to roam, no hill transfigured into cloud, no dragonwood to forage with a puck-led flock, but the rattle of a bucket, shouts of children bringing food across a frozen yard. Out in a forest, she would have known a bad leaf from a good. Here, captive to our taste, she'd learnt to trust the petting hand with crushed oats, or a new mash of concentrates, or sweet bits of waste. So, when a child mistook a sprig of yew and mixed it with her fodder, she descried no danger. We had tamed her instinct too. Whiskey, white of egg, linseed oil, we tried forcing down antidotes. Nothing would do. The children came to tell me when she died. from that the sad, low subject, I want to move now finally to a sequence of poems that are set, at least, on a more sublime location. And this is an island off the west coast of Ireland, a great lump of rock that juts up out of the sea very, very abruptly, called High Island, and it's totally uninhabited today. It was only occupied with any continuity in the golden age of saints and scholars. A hermitage was founded on High Island in the 7th century by Saint Fehín, and it lasted on and off until 1018, the 5th of August, 1018, when Saint Gormgall died there. He was the last of the saints to have his name entered in the Irish martyrologies. You may say the last Irish saint. He was a spiritual advisor of Brian Boru, the High King of Ireland, who was killed at the Battle of Clontarf on Good Friday, 1014, by a Viking, by a Dane. And at that very moment, the Battle of Clontarf was fought 200 miles away from High Island on the eastern, near Dublin, east coast of Ireland. High Island is off the west coast. At that very moment, on that Good Friday, St. Gormgall sent one of his monks to the well on High Island for some water, and he came back with a bucket of blood, thus indicating to the good man that the High King was dead, and that the water in the well on High Island has remained bloody until 1969, when I became the lucky possessor and guardian of the island. And then I found that it had turned into a black, stinking slime. And when I reported this to a fisherman, an old fisherman on the island of Inishbofin, he immediately said, "That must be on account of the trouble in the north of Ireland." And I've made it one of my duties to keep the well the water in that well on High Island as pure as possible. The island is, I think, the most beautiful thing on the island. It has many, many aspects, and the thing that I go back for, as I will be going back there very soon, is the storm petrel. And the storm petrels have chosen High Island as one of their nesting grounds. The storm petrel is the smallest of the birds that spends its entire life at sea. It's a pelagic ocean bird, and it's about the size of a swallow, about that sort of size. And colonies of them nest on High Island. They come in from the ocean in the spring, and they particularly like the ruins of the Christian hermitage as a place to lay their eggs underground in the graves of the hermits, under the altar, in the walls of the oratory. And the birds hatching on the nest, when they start to send out a signal to the birds in the sky, do sound like the resurrection. The whole ground under your feet starts to vibrate at nightfall. They particularly call, the birds that are sitting on the nest start to call at dusk, and they keep up their messages until dawn to the birds that are flying in from the ocean to join them. Now, the reason for this is that the storm petrel has had a very good custom of sharing the labor of hatching the egg and rearing the young bird equally between the sexes. And it's been practicing this fact of equal rights for 60 million years, according to the fossil record, so that even if it takes the Senate and the states a little bit longer, they'll get around to it, and when they do get around to it, it will be forever. And the bird on the nest is sending a signal to the bird in the sky so that it can identify its nest, locate it, and so they can change places, the male and the female. And it's a very beautiful, strange sound in a totally foreign language. And I tried to find English words that would fit what seemed to me to be what the storm petrels were saying. And I wrote a poem called Nocturne about the sounds of the storm petrel at night on High Island. The blade of a knife is tapped gently on an oak table. Waves are sobbing in coves. Light bleeds on the sky's rim from dusk till dawn. Petrels fly in from the ocean, wings beating on stone, quick vibration of notes, throats, tongues under silver weed, calling and calling. Louder cries cut the air. They rise from a pit. Complaints are retched up and lost. A solo tune is dying with passion for someone out there to come quickly. Come back, come back. I'm here, here, here. This burrow, this wall, this hole. Ah, who kept you? Where have you been? There, there, there. It's all over, over, over. There's a big lump of granite on the island near the monastery, and it has no figures carved on it. It's very smooth and slippy, very, very heavy to lift. It must weigh 100, 120, 130 pounds, and it's almost round. And I address these words. Everybody who goes to the island wonders what it is, and they try to lift it, and it's almost impossible. I address these words to the granite globe on High Island. Straining my back 7 times, I've lifted you up to my thighs. There are men who've put you sitting high on their shoulders. It looks as if you'd been lopped off the top of a column, then used as a quern, kicked around, buried. An archaeologist taped you and wrote you down. He said, "You're an oblate spheroid." Does it matter? Whoever carved you gave you all the time in the world. Well, that word time reminds me that it's time to close. And I'll read you finally a poem about the grey Atlantic seals, which have quite a large colony on High Island, a colony that's threatened both by Atlantic storms and also by the fishermen who sometimes shoot the seals, because the seals like to pick the fish out of the salmon nets, and they tear the nets when they do this, so that fishermen hate seals. And I heard them sing once, and the melody haunted me for 3 or 4 years until I wrote this poem. They are like the sirens in the Odyssey, or like the banshee in Irish mythology, like mermaids singing. Very, very beautiful, very, very plaintive melody that combines the passion of a slow movement of one of Beethoven's late quartets with the most ultra-modern atonal electronic music written on a synthesizer. And this poem is a celebration of a poem about the seals, who in September, the harvest period, give birth to their young in the coves, and then 2 weeks later they mate. So the whole process of generation is happening at the one time in the colony and on the island. This is seals at High Island. The calamity of seals begins with jaws. Born in caverns that reverberate with endless malice of the sea's tongue clacking on shingle, they learn to bark back in fear and sadness and celebration. The ocean's mouth opens 40 feet wide and closes on a morsel of their rock. Swayed by the thrust and backfall of the tide, a dappled grey bull and a brindled cow copulate in the green water of a cove. I watch from a cliff top, trying not to move. Sometimes they sink and merge into black shoals, then rise for air, his muzzle on her neck, their winged feet intertwined as a fishtail. She opens her fierce mouth like a scarlet flower full of white seeds. She holds it open long at the sunburst in the music of their loving, and cries a little. But I must remember how far their feelings are from mine marooned. If there are tears at this holy ceremony, theirs are caused by brine, and mine by breeze. When the great bull withdraws his rod, it glows like a carnelian candle set in jade. The cow ripples ashore to feed her calf, while an old rival, eyeing the deed with hate, swims to attack the tired triumphant god. They rear their heads above the boiling surf, their terrible jaws open, jetting blood. At nightfall, they haul out and mourn the drowned, playing to the sea sadly their last quartet, an improvised requiem that ravishes reason while ripping scale up like a net, brings pity trembling down the rocky spine of headlands, till the bitter ocean's tongue swells in their cove and smothers their sweet song.